Story 1. The Secret of Apartment 707. October 2023. I, Rachel, a single graphic designer, 29 years old, had just moved into an apartment on the 7th floor of an old apartment building in Brooklyn, New York, after a difficult period with work stress and a broken relationship. I was seeking a private and quiet space to start anew. This apartment, though old and somewhat dilapidated, had a balcony overlooking the bustling city, and the rent was quite affordable. The first day I moved in, the air in the apartment smelled musty and dusty, mixed with a faint scent of old paint and a strange aroma, vaguely like dried lilies and something indescribably metallic. The light inside was quite dim, due to the old, dusty window frames and the yellowed walls. The outside noise, like car horns and chatter, seemed unable to penetrate here, creating an eerie silence. I told myself it was just the normal quietness of a high-floor apartment. I started unpacking. The master bedroom had a large window overlooking the building's inner courtyard. When I opened the window, a sudden gust of cold air rushed in, bringing with it a whistling sound and a damp smell. I shivered, but still tried to finish cleaning. The first night in Brooklyn, a moonless night with fog covering the apartment building. I tossed and turned on my temporary bed. The creaking of the floorboards on the floor above was clearly audible, and occasionally, I heard very faint noises, like cupboard doors opening and closing in my own apartment, even though I knew I was alone. I tried to close my eyes and sleep, but a feeling that someone was staring at me kept me awake. The next morning, I woke up feeling tired. I went downstairs to make coffee, and when I turned around to get sugar, I saw my apartment key, the one I always kept on the hook, had inexplicably moved, lying right on the dining table. I was sure I had hung it on the hook last night. I told myself I was absent-minded, or it was due to the neighbor's cat. I spent the whole morning arranging my books and documents. As I was placing an old book on the shelf, I felt as if someone had just lightly touched my hair, a cold and uncomfortable sensation. I spun around, but no one was there. Only dusty stacks of books and a chilling stillness. In the afternoon, I took the elevator down to the lobby to check my mailbox. The hallway was long and dark, the light from the old fluorescent bulbs flickering constantly, creating a gloomy atmosphere. As I was walking, I felt a cold gust of wind brush past me, even though there were no windows here. I shivered, and quickly walked faster. That night, I had a strange dream. I saw myself standing in the dark hallway of the apartment building. In the distance, I saw a shadowy figure of a woman, wearing a worn white dress, standing with her back to me, looking into a door. She said nothing, just stood there, her long black hair flowing down her back, and I sensed an infinite sorrow from her. When she slowly turned her head, I saw her face was pale, her eyes dark and empty, and a twisted smile, full of haunting. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding, cold sweat pouring out. The dreams of the woman in the white dress in the hallway began to appear more frequently, each night clearer and more haunting. In the dreams, she always stood there, staring at a specific door, and sometimes I heard her whisper unclear things, like the sound of wind whistling through a crack in the door. I started to feel anxious. My insomnia worsened, and I often woke up in the middle of the night with a feeling of fear and coldness enveloping me. One morning, as I was sitting drinking coffee in the kitchen, I heard someone calling my name very softly, weakly, mixed with the city's noise. I thought it was the wind, but as I listened more carefully, it was definitely my name being called. Rachel. The voice sounded very hoarse, and had a sad and sorrowful tone. I tiptoed out to the hallway, but when I got there, the call had disappeared, and no one was there. The feeling of being watched became increasingly obvious. I constantly felt as if someone was standing right behind me, or watching me from some hidden corner in my apartment. Sometimes, when I turned around abruptly, I had the feeling of just seeing a shadow flit past the corner of my eye. But when I looked closely again, nothing was there. The temperature in the apartment began to change unusually. There were corners of rooms, even with the heater on all day, that remained bone-chillingly cold, so cold I could see my breath. Especially in the area near the entrance and the hallway, where I often felt this unusual coldness. One night, as I was trying to focus on work to dismiss the terrifying dreams, I heard a very faint whisper, like the soft sound of wind blowing through a crack in the door. But then it became clearer, like someone calling my name. Rachel. The voice sounded very hoarse, but there was something very weak and full of sadness about it. My hair stood on end, listening intently, but then it stopped completely. I began to have difficulty sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of the woman in the white dress standing in the hallway reappeared, haunting me. I tried to reassure myself that it was just dreams due to stress, but the feeling of fear clung to me, keeping me awake all night, only getting a little sleep before waking up again. One late afternoon, as the weak sunlight shone through the old windows, I sat looking out at the hallway. I swore I saw a faint shadow of the woman, standing silently in front of a door. She stared at it, as if waiting for someone. I rubbed my eyes, looked closely again, but the shadow had disappeared. I started to doubt myself, whether I was hallucinating due to being too lonely and stressed. I tried to learn about the history of the building and this area, asking the few longtime residents I met, but they all seemed to avoid the topic, only saying that this building had been there for a very long time, and there were some bad things that happened here, but no one wanted to elaborate. I felt surrounded by a mysterious and frightening atmosphere. The sleepless nights continued. The accumulated fatigue made me irritable and easily agitated. I often woke up in the middle of the night, with my heart pounding as if it wanted to burst from my chest, and a heavy feeling, as if someone was sitting on my chest. I began to believe that it wasn't just dreams, but there was truly an unusual presence in this apartment with me, and in the hallway. One night, as I was sleeping soundly, I was suddenly awakened by the faint hum of a song, echoing from the hallway upstairs. The singing sounded very sad, like a mournful melody, full of despair. I sat up abruptly, my heart pounding, listening intently. The singing seemed to come from very far away, mixed with the sound of wind whistling through the hallway. I tiptoed out of the apartment, looking up towards the stairs leading to the upper floor. No one was there, only the flickering hallway lights and an eerie silence that enveloped everything. However, I felt a bone-chilling gust of air radiating from above, and I sensed a deep sadness enveloping the space. Suddenly, the singing stopped. Instead, there was a frantic scream, like the scream of a woman experiencing something horrifying, echoing throughout the hallway, then abruptly falling silent. I stood there, motionless, my whole body cold, listening to the terrifying silence that enveloped everything. From that night on, the sad song and the frantic scream became a part of every night for me. Sometimes they sounded very close, as if they were right next to my ear. Sometimes very far away, as if echoing from somewhere very distant in the building. I tried to cover my ears, but the sound seemed to penetrate my mind, spreading fear and making me unable to sleep. I began to feel that I was no longer safe in this apartment, or in this building. Something was here with me, something dark and terrifying, and it was slowly encroaching on my life. The fear made me unable to sleep soundly, always waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing. I began to doubt myself, whether all this was just a product of my weakened imagination, or if there was truly a supernatural force tormenting me. In despair, I decided to delve deeper into the history of this apartment building and the people who had lived here, hoping to find the cause of these strange phenomena. I went to the building management office, asking the longtime residents, but they all seemed to avoid the topic, only saying that this building had been there for a very long time, and there were some bad things that happened here, but no one wanted to elaborate. I found an old newspaper article from 1980, reporting on a tragic suicide that occurred in this apartment building. According to the article, a young female student named Sarah Jenkins committed suicide by jumping from her apartment balcony on the 7th floor. Her body was found in the building's courtyard. What made me shiver was that Sarah Jenkins was described as having long black hair and often wearing a white dress when at home, and her apartment was Unit 707. Directly above mine, holding the newspaper in my hand, I felt a chill run down my spine. I recalled the dreams of the woman in the white dress in the hallway, the sad song and the frantic scream. All of these matched the story of Sarah Jenkins. I returned to my apartment, with a heavy heart. I started looking for any remaining traces of Sarah. I ransacked the rooms, checked every drawer, every old wardrobe. Finally, in an old wooden box under the bed, I found a faded and moldy diary. The diary was written in Sarah Jenkins' shaky handwriting. The first pages described her life, the dreams and aspirations of a young girl. But then, the last pages were filled with fear, despair, and haunting words about a dark shadow always watching her in the apartment. Something whispering terrible things into her ear, and nightmares of being pushed from a height. Sarah wrote that she felt trapped and couldn't escape the haunting. A passage in the diary made me shiver. It's calling me. It's pushing me. From above, I can't breathe anymore. I closed the diary, feeling an infinite pity for Sarah. She had experienced extreme fear, and her spirit was still trapped here, haunting this apartment building, and especially apartment 707, where she ended her life. That also explained why she always appeared in the hallway, where she walked the most. That night, I had another dream. This time, I saw Sarah Jenkins standing in the hallway, no longer vague, but vividly real. She had her back to me, looking into apartment 707. And I saw her singing a sad song, but there was no longer a frantic scream. When she slowly turned her head, her face was still pale, her eyes dark and empty, but the twisted smile was gone, replaced by a look of despair and pleading. She reached out her hand, pointing to the door of apartment 707. And I heard her whisper, don't open it." The voice was no longer weak, but became strong and clear. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding. I knew Sarah Jenkins was warning me. She wanted me to stay away from apartment 707 and the horrifying secrets hidden within. I felt as if I was being drawn into a vortex of tragedy, and I didn't know what to do to escape. After finding Sarah Jenkins' diary and the warnings from my dream, my fear reached its peak. I believed that some force had haunted Sarah, and her spirit was still lingering here, seeking liberation, and at the same time warning me. One night, as I was trying to sleep, the creaking of the floorboards on the upper floor suddenly became more violent, as if someone was walking very fast. My room window suddenly flew open, and a bone-chilling gust of wind poured in, carrying the scent of dried lilies. I sat up abruptly, and saw a faint white shadow standing right outside the window, looking directly at me. It was Sarah Jenkins, but this time, her face no longer held that fragile peace, but was filled with panic and despair. She reached out to me. Her lips moved, and I heard a faint whisper, but full of haunting. "Run, it's coming. It's looking for me, and now, it's looking for you." Immediately after, a loud crash suddenly echoed from apartment 707, creating a terrifying sound, and I felt the entire building shake. Sarah's white shadow vanished into thin air, but the coldness and fear still lingered. I knew this was the final warning. I couldn't stay here any longer. I quickly packed only the most necessary belongings, not caring about what was left behind. I rushed out of the apartment, running at full speed into the cold, dark night, towards the emergency staircase, not daring to look back. The creaking and whispering still echoed behind me, like Sarah's crying, or the growl of something searching. I ran and ran, until I was exhausted and collapsed in the building's lobby. I lay there, gasping for breath, staring at the old elevator door, the floor numbers still flickering endlessly, as if trying to haunt me. After that horrifying night, I never dared to return to the apartment in Brooklyn again. I left all my belongings behind, rented a shabby room in a different neighborhood, and tried to forget what had happened. But the memories of Sarah Jenkins, of the sad song, the frantic scream, and the white shadow in the hallway still haunted my dreams, making me unable to sleep soundly. I looked into other suicides in old apartment buildings in Brooklyn, and I discovered that a few similar cases had occurred in the past. People who committed suicide mysteriously, and stories of trapped souls. Perhaps Sarah Jenkins was not the only victim of some dark force hiding within these old walls. After fleeing the apartment in Brooklyn, I tried to rebuild my life in another city, hundreds of miles away from that place. I found a new job, and tried to forget the horrifying memories of the old apartment building and the ghost girl. However, the haunting still clung to me. I often had nightmares, in which I saw myself standing in the dark hallway, and something from apartment 707 was pulling me in. I became afraid of long, dark hallways, and always felt as if someone was watching me, especially when I was in enclosed spaces. I sought help from psychologists, but it seemed no one could explain what I had experienced. They suggested I had PTSD, but I knew what I had seen and felt was completely real. Sometimes, I wondered whether Sarah Jenkins' spirit was still lingering in that old apartment building, or if she had found peace. And whether that Sarah mentioned, the force that had haunted her, was still there, waiting for the next victim. I never dared to return to that old apartment building in Brooklyn again. The building still stood there, normal and quiet under the sun, but I knew, hidden deep within those old walls, were dark secrets and trapped souls. And I, Rachel, who witnessed and survived those horrifying events, still live with the terrifying echoes, knowing that some dark forces always exist, hidden behind the ordinary facade of our world. And sometimes, they will seek out empathetic hearts to tell their stories. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when faint creaks echo in my apartment, I still feel a cold breath on the back of my neck, and catch a glimpse of the faint figure of the girl, standing in the hallway, looking towards apartment 707. As a reminder that the horror in Brooklyn has not truly ended. Story 2. The darkness descends on a new apartment. November 2023. I, Olivia, a freelance graphic designer, 32 years old, had just moved into a small apartment on the 5th floor of an old apartment building in Chicago, Illinois. My job often required me to work late nights, and I wanted to find a quieter place to focus. This apartment, though old and somewhat dilapidated, had a balcony overlooking the sparkling city lights at night, and the rent was quite affordable, fitting my budget after a few failed projects. The first day I moved in, the air in the apartment smelled musty and dusty, mixed with a faint scent of old wood and a strange aroma, vaguely like dried jasmine and something indescribably cold. The light inside was quite dim, due to the old, dusty window frames, and the yellowed walls. The outside noise, like car horns and chatter, seemed to be swallowed by the eerie silence of the building. I told myself it was just the normal quietness of a high-floor apartment. I started unpacking. The master bedroom had a large window overlooking the building's inner courtyard. When I opened the window, a sudden gust of cold air rushed in, bringing with it a whistling sound and a damp smell. I shivered, but still tried to finish cleaning. The first night in Chicago, a moonless night with cold winds covering the apartment building. I tossed and turned on my temporary bed. The creaking of the floorboards on the floor above was clearly audible, and occasionally, I heard very faint noises, like objects clinking in my own apartment, even though I knew I was alone. I tried to close my eyes and sleep, but a feeling that someone was staring at me kept me awake. The next morning, I woke up feeling tired. I went downstairs to make coffee, and when I turned around to get a mug, I saw my grandfather's old pocket watch, the one I always kept on my nightstand, had inexplicably moved, lying right in the middle of the kitchen table. I was sure I had left it on the nightstand last night. I told myself I was absent-minded, or it was due to vibration. I spent the whole morning arranging my drawings and papers. As I was placing an old sketch pad on the shelf, I felt as if someone had just lightly touched my hand, a cold and uncomfortable sensation. I spun around, but no one was there. Only dusty stacks of papers and a chilling stillness. In the afternoon, I took the elevator down to the lobby to check my mailbox. The hallway was long and dark, the light from the old fluorescent bulbs flickering constantly, creating a gloomy atmosphere. As I was walking, I felt a cold gust of wind brush past me, even though there were no windows here. I shivered, and quickly walked faster. That night, around 1 a.m., when I returned home from work, I decided to take the stairs to save time. The hallway was deserted. Only faint light shone from the apartments. As I descended the stairs from the 6th to the 5th floor, I briefly saw a shadowy figure of a woman dressed in black, her long black hair covering her face, sitting huddled on the landing between the 4th and 5th floors. She was completely still. I froze, my heart pounding. I told myself it was just a tenant resting. But then, a sudden cold gust of wind swept past me, and I felt an invisible fear envelop me. I hurried on, not daring to look back. The images of the woman in black on the stairs began to haunt me, becoming clearer each night. I started to feel anxious. My insomnia worsened, and I often woke up in the middle of the night with a feeling of fear and coldness enveloping me. One morning, as I was sitting drinking coffee in the kitchen, I heard someone calling my name very softly, faintly, mixed with the city's noise. I thought it was the wind, but as I listened more carefully, it was definitely my name being called. Olivia. The voice sounded very hoarse, and had a sad and mournful tone. I tiptoed out to the hallway, but when I got there, the call had disappeared, and no one was there. The feeling of being watched became increasingly obvious. I constantly felt as if someone was standing right behind me, or watching me from some hidden corner in my apartment. Sometimes, when I turned around abruptly, I had the feeling of just seeing a shadow flit past the corner of my eye. But when I looked closely again, nothing was there. The temperature in the apartment began to change unusually. There were corners of rooms, even with the heater on all day, that remained bone-chillingly cold. So cold I could see my breath. Especially in the area near the entrance and the hallway, where I often felt this unusual coldness. One night, around 1 a.m., when I returned home from work, I decided to take the stairs again. As I descended from the 6th floor, I saw the shadowy figure of the woman in black again. This time she was standing, with her back to me, on the landing between the 4th and 5th floors. Her long black hair covered her face. I froze, my heart pounding. I held my breath, trying to walk as lightly as possible to avoid making any noise. As I passed by, I heard a small, faint sob, like a muffled cry. I shivered, and quickly ran down to my apartment. I began to have difficulty sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of the woman in black standing on the stairs reappeared, haunting me. I tried to reassure myself that it was just dreams due to stress, but the feeling of fear clung to me, keeping me awake all night, only getting a little sleep before waking up again. One late afternoon, as the weak sunlight shone through the old windows, I sat looking out at the hallway. I swore I saw a faint shadow of the woman, standing silently at the end of the hallway. She stared at my apartment, as if waiting for someone. I rubbed my eyes, looked closely again, but the shadow had disappeared. I started to doubt myself, whether I was hallucinating due to being too lonely and stressed. I tried to learn about the history of the building and this area, asking the few longtime residents I met, but they all seemed to avoid the topic, only saying that this building had been there for a very long time, and there were some bad things that happened here, but no one wanted to elaborate. I felt surrounded by a mysterious and frightening atmosphere. The sleepless nights continued. The accumulated fatigue made me irritable and easily agitated. I often woke up in the middle of the night, with my heart pounding as if it wanted to burst from my chest, and a heavy feeling, as if someone was sitting on my chest. I began to believe that it wasn't just dreams, but there was truly an unusual presence in this apartment with me, and on the staircase. One night, as I was sleeping soundly, I was suddenly awakened by faint whispers, echoing from the staircase. The whispers sounded very vague, like wind rustling through a crack in the door, but they carried a sad and mournful tone. I sat up abruptly, my heart pounding, listening intently. The whispers seemed to come from very close, just below my apartment. I tiptoed out of the apartment, looking down the staircase. No one was there, only the flickering hallway lights and an eerie silence that enveloped everything. However, I felt a bone-chilling gust of air radiating from below, and I sensed a deep sadness enveloping the space. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. Instead, there was a frantic scream, like the scream of a woman experiencing something horrifying, echoing throughout the staircase, then abruptly falling silent. I stood there, motionless, my whole body cold, listening to the terrifying silence that enveloped everything. From that night on, the whispers and frantic screams became a part of every night for me. Sometimes they sounded very close, as if they were right next to my ear. Sometimes very far away, as if echoing from somewhere very distant in the building. I tried to cover my ears, but the sound seemed to penetrate my mind, spreading fear and making me unable to sleep. I began to feel that I was no longer safe in this apartment, or in this building. Something was here with me, something dark and terrifying, and it was slowly encroaching on my life. The fear made me unable to sleep soundly, always waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing. I began to doubt myself, whether all this was just a product of my weakened imagination, or if there was truly a supernatural force tormenting me. In despair, I decided to delve deeper into the history of this apartment building and the people who had lived here, hoping to find the cause of these strange phenomena. I went to the building management office, asking the longtime residents, but they all seemed to avoid the topic, only saying that this building had been there for a very long time, and there were some bad things that happened here, but no one wanted to elaborate. I found an old newspaper article from 1995, reporting on a mysterious disappearance that occurred in this apartment building. According to the article, a female student named Chloe Anderson disappeared mysteriously while returning home late from school, around 1 a.m. She was last seen on the staircase between the 4th and 5th floors. Her body was never found. What made me shiver was that Chloe Anderson was described as having long black hair and often wearing black clothes when returning home at night. Holding the newspaper in my hand, I felt a chill run down my spine. I recalled the dreams of the woman in black on the stairs, the faint weeping and the whispers. All of these matched the story of Chloe Anderson. I returned to my apartment with a heavy heart. I started looking for any remaining traces of Chloe. I ransacked the rooms, checked every drawer, every old wardrobe. Finally, in an old wooden box under the bed, I found a faded and moldy diary. The diary was written in Chloe Anderson's shaky handwriting. The first pages described her life, the dreams and aspirations of a young girl. But then, the last pages were filled with fear, despair, and haunting words about something always watching her on the staircase, something calling her name from the darkness, and nightmares of being dragged into a deep abyss. Chloe wrote that she felt trapped and couldn't escape the haunting. A passage in the diary made me shiver. It's calling me. It's dragging me from the darkness. I can't breathe anymore. I closed the diary, feeling an infinite pity for Chloe. She had experienced extreme fear, and her spirit was still trapped here, haunting this apartment building, and especially the staircase between the 4th and 5th floors, where she was last seen. That also explained why she always appeared there, around 1 a.m. That night, I had another dream. This time, I saw Chloe Anderson standing on the staircase, no longer vague, but vividly real. She had her back to me, looking down, and I saw her weeping softly, but there was no longer a frantic scream. When she slowly turned her head, her face was still pale, her eyes dark and empty, but the twisted smile was gone, replaced by a look of despair and pleading. She reached out her hand, pointing to the void below the staircase, and I heard her whisper, don't look down." The voice was no longer weak, but became strong and clear. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding. I knew Chloe Anderson was warning me. She wanted me to stay away from the staircase and the horrifying secrets hidden beneath. I felt as if I was being drawn into a vortex of tragedy, and I didn't know what to do to escape. After finding Chloe Anderson's diary and the warnings from my dream, my fear reached its peak. I believed that some force had haunted Chloe, and her spirit was still lingering here, seeking liberation, and at the same time warning me. One night, I decided not to take the stairs anymore, but the elevator. Around 1 a.m., when I returned home, the elevator suddenly stopped between the 4th and 5th floors. The lights in the elevator flickered continuously, then went out completely, leaving only darkness. I felt a bone-chilling gust of air pour in, carrying the scent of dried jasmine. I tried to stay calm, pressing the emergency call button, but there was no signal. Suddenly, I heard faint whispers right next to me. "You will be like me too." I spun around, and saw a faint black shadow standing right next to me, her long black hair covering her face. It was Chloe Anderson. She reached out to me, her lips moved, and I heard a faint whisper, but full of haunting. "You can't escape. It's waiting for you." Immediately after, A loud crash suddenly echoed from below the elevator, creating a terrifying sound, and I felt the entire elevator shake. Chloe's black shadow vanished into thin air, but the coldness and fear still lingered. I knew this was not just a warning, but a direct confrontation. The lights in the elevator came back on, and the elevator continued to operate. I quickly got out of the elevator as soon as the doors opened, running at full speed into the cold dark night, towards my apartment, not daring to look back. The whispers and cries still echoed behind me, like Chloe's wailing, or the growl of something searching. I rushed into my apartment, locked the door tightly, and huddled on the floor. My heart pounding as if it wanted to explode. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. After fleeing the apartment in Chicago, I tried to rebuild my life in another city, hundreds of miles away from that place. I found a new job, and tried to forget the horrifying memories of the old apartment building and the ghost girl. However, the haunting still clung to me. I often had nightmares, in which I saw myself standing in the dark hallway, and something from apartment 707 was pulling me in. I became afraid of long, dark hallways, and always felt as if someone was watching me, especially when I was in enclosed spaces. I sought help from psychologists, but it seemed no one could explain what I had experienced. They suggested I had PTSD, but I knew what I had seen and felt was completely real. Sometimes, I wondered whether Chloe Anderson's spirit was still lingering in that old apartment building, or if she had found peace. And whether it, that Chloe mentioned, the force that had haunted her, was still there, waiting for the next victim. I never dared to return to that old apartment building in Chicago again. The building still stood there, normal and quiet under the sun, but I knew, hidden deep within those old walls, were dark secrets and trapped souls. And I, Olivia, who witnessed and survived those horrifying events, still live with the terrifying echoes, knowing that some dark forces always exist, hidden behind the ordinary facade of our world. And sometimes, they will seek out empathetic hearts to tell their stories. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when faint creaks echo in my apartment, I still feel a cold breath on the back of my neck, and catch a glimpse of the faint figure of the girl, standing on the staircase, looking towards my apartment, as a reminder that the horror in Chicago has not truly ended. Story 3. The Silent Footsteps. March 2024. I, Emily, a 22-year-old architecture intern, had just moved into an apartment on the 12th floor of an old apartment building in Boston, Massachusetts. This was my first time living away from home, and I chose this place because the rent was affordable, though it was a bit far from the city center. My apartment looked normal on the outside, but I could feel an old, musty atmosphere as soon as I stepped inside. On my first day moving in, the air in the apartment smelled musty and dusty, mixed with a hint of old cigarette smoke and a strange scent, faintly like dried carnations and something indescribably metallic. The light in the apartment was quite dim, due to the old, dusty window frames, and the yellowed walls. The outside noise, like car horns and chatter, seemed to be swallowed by the eerie silence of the building. I told myself it was just the normal quietness of a high-floor apartment. I started unpacking. The master bedroom had a large window overlooking the building's backyard. When I opened the window, a sudden gust of cold air rushed in, bringing with it a whistling sound and a damp smell. I shivered, but still tried to finish cleaning. My first night in Boston, a moonless night with fog covering the apartment building. I tossed and turned on my temporary bed. The creaking of the floorboards on the floor above was clearly audible, and occasionally, I heard very faint noises, like objects clinking in my own apartment, even though I knew I was alone. I tried to close my eyes and sleep, but a feeling that someone was staring at me kept me awake. The next morning, I woke up feeling tired. I went downstairs to make coffee, and when I turned around to get sugar, I saw my favorite mug, the one I always kept on the shelf, had inexplicably moved, lying right in the middle of the kitchen table. I was sure I had left it on the shelf last night. I told myself I was absent-minded, or it was due to vibration. I spent the whole morning arranging my books and study materials. As I was placing an old book on the shelf, I felt as if someone had just lightly touched my shoulder, a cold and uncomfortable sensation. I spun around, but no one was there. Only dusty stacks of books and a chilling stillness. In the afternoon, I took the elevator down to the lobby to check my mailbox. The hallway was long and dark, the light from the old fluorescent bulbs flickering constantly, creating a gloomy atmosphere. As I was walking, I felt a cold gust of wind brush past me, even though there were no windows here. I shivered, and quickly walked faster. When the elevator stopped on the 13th floor, I saw the elevator doors automatically open, even though no one had pressed the button. I looked inside, saw no one, and the elevator doors slowly closed again. I told myself it was just a technical malfunction. That night, I had a strange dream. I saw myself standing on the building's staircase. In the distance, I saw a shadowy figure of an elderly woman, with white hair, slowly ascending. She wore old, gray clothes, and walked very slowly. She said nothing, just climbed each step, her long white hair flowing down her back, and I sensed an infinite sorrow from her. When she slowly turned her head, I saw her face was wrinkled, her eyes cloudy and empty, and a twisted smile, full of haunting. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding, cold sweat pouring out. The dreams of the white-haired old woman on the staircase began to appear more frequently, each night clearer and more haunting. In the dreams, she always ascended or descended the stairs, very slowly and silently, and sometimes I heard her whisper unclear things, like the sound of wind whistling through a crack in the door. I started to feel anxious. My insomnia worsened, and I often woke up in the middle of the night with a feeling of fear and coldness enveloping me. One morning, as I was studying in the kitchen, I heard someone calling my name very softly, faintly, mixed with the city's noise. I thought it was the wind, but as I listened more carefully, it was definitely my name being called. Emily. The voice sounded very hoarse, and had a sad and mournful tone. I tiptoed out to the hallway, but when I got there, the call had disappeared, and no one was there. The feeling of being watched became increasingly obvious. I constantly felt as if someone was standing right behind me, or watching me from some hidden corner in my apartment. Sometimes, when I turned around abruptly, I had the feeling of just seeing a shadow flit past the corner of my eye, but when I looked closely again, nothing was there. The temperature in the apartment began to change unusually. There were corners of rooms, even with the heater on all day, that remained bone-chillingly cold, so cold I could see my breath. Especially in the area near the entrance and the balcony, where I often felt this unusual coldness. One night, around 1 a.m., I returned home from my internship, and I decided to take the elevator. When the elevator stopped on the 13th floor, the elevator doors automatically opened again, even though no one had pressed the button. This time, I looked inside, saw no one, but I felt a bone-chilling gust of air radiating from within. The elevator doors slowly closed again. I shivered, tried to stay calm, and pressed my floor button. I began to have difficulty sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of the white-haired old woman on the staircase or the scene of the elevator opening by itself on the 13th floor reappeared, haunting me. I tried to reassure myself that it was just dreams due to stress, but the feeling of fear clung to me, keeping me awake all night, only getting a little sleep before waking up again. One late afternoon, as the weak sunlight shone through the old windows, I sat looking out at the hallway. I swore I saw a faint shadow of the old woman, standing silently at the end of the hallway. She stared at my apartment, as if waiting for someone. I rubbed my eyes, looked closely again, but the shadow had disappeared. I started to doubt myself, whether I was hallucinating due to being too lonely and stressed. I tried to learn about the history of the building and this area, asking the few longtime residents I met, but they all seemed to avoid the topic, only saying that this building had been there for a very long time, and there were some bad things that happened here, but no one wanted to elaborate. I felt surrounded by a mysterious and frightening atmosphere. The sleepless nights continued. The accumulated fatigue made me irritable and easily agitated. I often woke up in the middle of the night, with my heart pounding as if it wanted to burst from my chest, and a heavy feeling, as if someone was sitting on my chest. I began to believe that it wasn't just dreams, but there was truly an unusual presence in this apartment with me, and on the staircase, as well as on the 13th floor. One night, as I was sleeping soundly, I was suddenly awakened by faint whispers, echoing from the upper floor, as if from the rooftop. The whispers sounded very vague, like wind rustling through a crack in the door, but they carried a sad and mournful tone. I sat up abruptly, my heart pounding, listening intently. The whispers seemed to come from very close, just above my apartment. I tiptoed out of the apartment, looking up towards the stairs leading to the upper floor. No one was there, only the flickering hallway lights and an eerie silence that enveloped everything. However, I felt a bone-chilling gust of air radiating from above, and I sensed a deep sadness enveloping the space. Suddenly, the whispers stopped. Instead, there was a loud crash, like objects falling, echoing throughout the building, then abruptly falling silent. I stood there, motionless, my whole body cold, listening to the terrifying silence that enveloped everything. From that night on, the whispers and strange noises became a part of every night for me. Sometimes they sounded very close, as if they were right next to my ear. Sometimes very far away, as if echoing from somewhere very distant in the building. I tried to cover my ears, but the sound seemed to penetrate my mind, spreading fear and making me unable to sleep. I began to feel that I was no longer safe in this apartment, or in this building. Something was here with me, something dark and terrifying, and it was slowly encroaching on my life. The fear made me unable to sleep soundly, always waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing. I began to doubt myself, whether all this was just a product of my weakened imagination, or if there was truly a supernatural force tormenting me. In despair, I decided to delve deeper into the history of this apartment building and the people who had lived here, hoping to find the cause of these strange phenomena. I went to the building management office, asking the longtime residents, but they all seemed to avoid the topic, only saying that this building had been there for a very long time, and there were some bad things that happened here, but no one wanted to elaborate. I found an old newspaper article from 1970, reporting on a tragic suicide that occurred in this apartment building. According to the article, an elderly woman named Eleanor Vance committed suicide by jumping from the building's rooftop after her daughter mysteriously disappeared. She was described as a lonely woman, with white hair and often walking on the staircase. Her body was found in the building's courtyard, near the entrance. What made me shiver was that Eleanor's apartment was the only one on the 13th floor. A floor that had been skipped for many years due to ghostly stories. Holding the newspaper in my hand, I felt a chill run down my spine. I recalled the dreams of the white-haired old woman on the staircase, the whispers and the scene of the elevator opening by itself on the 13th floor. All of these matched the story of Eleanor Vance. I returned to my apartment, with a heavy heart. I started looking for any remaining traces of Eleanor. I ransacked the rooms, checked every drawer, every old wardrobe. Finally, in an old wooden box under the bed, I found a faded and moldy diary. The diary was written in Eleanor Vance's shaky handwriting. The first pages described her life, her love for her daughter. But then, the last pages were filled with fear, despair, and haunting words about something that had taken her daughter. Something calling her daughter's name from the 13th floor, and nightmares of being compelled to jump. Eleanor wrote that she felt trapped, and couldn't escape the haunting. A passage in the diary made me shiver. It took my daughter. It's calling me. From the 13th floor. I can't take it anymore. I closed the diary, feeling an infinite pity for Eleanor. She had experienced extreme fear, and her spirit was still trapped here, haunting this apartment building, and especially the staircase, as well as the 13th floor, where she ended her life. That also explained why she always appeared there, and why the elevator kept opening by itself on the 13th floor. That night, I had another dream. This time, I saw Eleanor Vance standing on the staircase, no longer vague, but vividly real. She had her back to me, looking up towards the 13th floor, and I saw her weeping softly. But there was no longer a frantic scream. When she slowly turned her head, her face was still wrinkled, her eyes cloudy and empty, but the twisted smile was gone, replaced by a look of despair and pleading. She reached out her hand, pointing to the void above, and I heard her whisper, "Go, before it finds you." The voice was no longer weak, but became strong and clear. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding. I knew Eleanor Vance was warning me. She wanted me to leave this apartment building, and the horrifying secrets hidden within. I felt as if I was being drawn into a vortex of tragedy, and I didn't know what to do to escape. After finding Eleanor Vance's diary and the warnings from my dream, my fear reached its peak. I believed that some force had haunted Eleanor and taken her daughter, and her spirit was still lingering here, seeking liberation, and at the same time warning me. One night, I decided not to take the stairs anymore, but the elevator. Around 1 a.m., when I returned home, the elevator suddenly stopped on the 13th floor. The lights in the elevator flickered continuously, then went out completely, leaving only darkness. I felt a bone-chilling gust of air pour in, carrying the scent of dried carnations. I tried to stay calm, pressing the emergency call button, but there was no signal. Suddenly, I heard faint whispers right next to me. "You will lose everything too." I spun around, and saw a faint white shadow standing right next to me, her white hair flowing down. It was Eleanor Vance. She reached out to me, her lips moved, and I heard a faint whisper, but full of haunting. "You can't escape. It's waiting for you, on this floor." Immediately after, a loud crash suddenly echoed from above the elevator, creating a terrifying sound, and I felt the entire elevator shake violently. Eleanor's white shadow vanished into thin air, but the coldness and fear still lingered. I knew this was not just a warning, but a direct confrontation. The lights in the elevator came back on, and the elevator continued to operate. I quickly got out of the elevator as soon as the doors opened on my floor, running at full speed into the cold dark night, towards my apartment, not daring to look back. The whispers and rumbling still echoed behind me, like Eleanor's wailing, or the growl of something searching. I rushed into my apartment, locked the door tightly, and huddled on the floor, my heart pounding as if it wanted to explode. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. After that horrifying night, I never dared to return to the apartment in Boston again. I left all my belongings behind, rented a shabby room in a different neighborhood, and tried to forget what had happened. But the memories of Eleanor Vance, of the white-haired old woman on the staircase, the elevator opening by itself on the 13th floor, the whispers and the sudden tremors, still haunted my dreams, making me unable to sleep soundly. I looked into other disappearances and suicides in old apartment buildings in Boston, and I discovered that a few similar cases had occurred in the past. People who disappeared mysteriously, and stories of trapped souls. Perhaps Eleanor Vance was not the only victim of some dark force hiding within these old walls. I sought help from psychologists, but it seemed no one could explain what I had experienced. They suggested I had PTSD, but I knew what I had seen and felt was completely real. Sometimes I wondered whether Eleanor Vance's spirit was still lingering in that old apartment building, or if she had found peace. And whether it, that Eleanor mentioned, the force that had haunted her and taken her daughter, was still there, waiting for the next victim. I never dared to return to that old apartment building in Boston again. The building still stood there, normal and quiet under the sun, but I knew, hidden deep within those old walls, were dark secrets and trapped souls, especially on the cursed 13th floor. And I, Emily, who witnessed and survived those horrifying events, still live with the terrifying echoes, knowing that some dark forces always exist, hidden behind the ordinary facade of our world. And sometimes, they will seek out empathetic hearts to tell their stories. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, when faint creaks echo in my apartment, I still feel a cold breath on the back of my neck, and catch a glimpse of the faint figure of the white-haired old woman, standing on the staircase, looking towards my apartment, as a reminder that the horror in Boston has not truly ended. If this story has given you chills, please subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next real horror stories.